head game is brilliant. This is the 5th episode of the 4th season of Frasier. This is directed by David Lee, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And this is another one where Frasier is barely in it. And while I do miss Frasier, it still works really well. And it's nice to have a bit more attention on Niles. Frasier is actually about to spend a week in Aspen at a psychiatrist convention, and he asks Niles to take over his radio show. And my first thought was, but Niles has no radio experience. And then I remembered, well, actually, neither did Frasier when he first got his show at KACL. So I think it's a pretty exciting concept. And I had seen this episode before, but I couldn't remember exactly how it played out. And we then cut to Niles at KACL. And it's kind of like an alternate universe of what it would be like if Niles had been the one to have the show. And it's so much fun. I really love it. Roz is clearly having a lot of fun with this as well. Niles, not so much. The call that we see him taking involves a cat, which I hadn't expected, and it's an absolute delight. But Ross is definitely having fun with it, a lot more so than Niles. And then Bulldog comes in, ready to do his show. As we know, it takes place after Frasier's, and he's interviewing a basketball player called Reggie McLemore, and he's played by Lorenzo Newton. And McLemore realizes that Niles, who was still in the room, who was just leaving, was the radio psychiatrist he'd just been listening to on the way in, and he asks Niles if he can help him with his game, and Niles isn't really sure what he can do. It's not his area of expertise, but they talk for a little bit, and it's really interesting to see Niles, on the one hand, doing the thing he's great at, but at the same time being completely out of his depth with the vocabulary and not really knowing what he's talking about with regards to the game. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there, and I think it's really fascinating to see. We then cut to Martin in the apartment watching a game on television. We don't immediately know what it is, and he's getting very excited by this, and then an advert comes on, or a commercial, and Daphne mocks Martin by getting excited over the commercial, which I thought was very, very well done, and I'm completely with Daphne on that one. And then Niles comes over, and I love how this played out, because he's clearly trying to tell Martin what happened with McLemore, but Martin wants to continue watching the game, and then we hear on the television that the ball gets passed to McLemore, and he scores, and they win, and it's triumphant. And then we see on the television an interviewer interviewing McLemore, and he says, "How did you turn things around?" And McLemore mentions that he had a session with Dr. Niles Crane. And Martin's face at that point is so golden. I'm so glad that that's how they decided to reveal it to Martin rather than Niles just telling him. I just thought it was so beautifully done. Niles goes down to KACL and everybody's praising him. Reggie has sent over, I don't know why I said Reggie there. Well, actually I do, because I've written Reggie in my notes. McLemore sent over these tickets for the game, and Martin then comes down to see him at KACL, which is really interesting. Well, it's moderately interesting. Martin has come down to KACL because he's proud of Niles for having this sports connection. He hasn't gone down to KACL to see Frasier. I don't know if he ever does. If he ever has, it's definitely not a frequent thing, whereas Niles has been there for 2 days and he's gone down there. And I think that's kind of upsetting in a way that Martin's only really willing to go down and see him because of this sports connection. But at the same time, it's nice that he's openly showing this pride in his son. So it's kind of, I guess, a little bit bittersweet. There are pros and cons to it. And of course, he's very happy that McLemore sent over these tickets for Niles, and Niles, Martin and Daphne then go to the basketball game. The seats are apparently brilliant. I know nothing about basketball. And unfortunately, the game isn't going as well as it could be. And McLemore approaches Niles and asks what's different this time. And he realises that the first time at KACL, he gave Niles' head a little rub. He kind of tousled his hair a little bit. And he thinks that must be the thing that brought him luck. It wasn't that the psychiatric help helped. It was a superstition. And he rubs Niles' head again and off he goes. We then cut back to the apartment. They get a letter from Frasier, nice to remind us that this is Frasier we're watching. And Niles then comes over just as Daphne is going out, and he tells Martin that they can't go to the game. And I think there's a bit of suspense here. I didn't immediately know why Niles thought they couldn't go to the game, so I think the pacing here is very effective. And he eventually explains that it's because he's not happy that it's just a superstition. And initially I thought it's because he was kind of being a bit moody and being a bit annoyed that he wasn't the reason things were going right. It was just, I guess, in his mind, a fluke because it's just a superstition. But then he actually explains it's because of his ethics, and he says, and I quote, "I'd be taking credit for something I don't deserve," which I think is actually a pretty logical thought process, and I think it tells a lot about Niles in a really positive way. And then Martin basically has a tantrum where he sulks, he throws himself down into the chair, and Niles says he can still watch it on the television. Martin says he doesn't want to watch it on the television. Niles says he'll get him a beer. Martin says, "I don't like beer." It's very funny and very well done. And Mahoney's performance there was brilliant. But Niles did manage to turn it around, kind of, by telling Martin, "My ethics are my ethics. And by the way, where do you think I got those ethics?" Which was actually really sweet. And I rather liked that. We then see Niles going down to the game, not to watch it, but he's going to see McLemore to tell him that he is happy to talk to him as a psychiatrist, but no more touching. I love the guard on the door, his face as he was overhearing this, but obviously not fully aware of the whole superstition thing, was very fun. It's very, very well written. And McLemore agrees, and he's going to go and talk to Niles, but at the last second he grabs a pair of scissors that his teammate is very conveniently handling at that point, with, of course, the insinuation that he's going to go and cut off some of Niles' lucky hair. And then we cut to the ending where Daphne and Martin are playing cards, and Martin reaches back and tussles Niles' hair, obviously trying to soak up some of that good luck. And it's a nice way to end things. I think it's a really great episode. As I said, yes, I do miss Frasier, but it's nice to every now and then shift the focus to Niles, and it is just a kind of alternate version of Frasier, where what if the show had been Niles? What if Niles had been the character they created for Cheers? I'm not saying I wanted them to do that, but it just is very thought-provoking. And if you haven't seen Cheers, the early Frasier is so much like Niles, that I don't know how much of Cheers David Hyde Pierce had watched, but certainly Niles is a lot like the early Frasier, so it's kind of fascinating in that regard as well. But I love the episode. I think it's very well done. We have some brilliant Niles moments, and I can't complain. All things considered, Head Game is a pretty great episode.